Hi everybody, Simon Whiteley here. It's been a little while since my last video. My intention in this video is to talk to a very special guest. I'll introduce him in a moment, but essentially to explain where things have been going the last couple of years since I last posted a video. So there's been a lot of things going on, drastic changes in my life, personal life, business life, all of that kind of stuff. Also had a few challenges with health, with the thing that can't be named over the last few years. Um, but today, this is the first video of a number that I'm going to be publishing over the next number of months. And today we're going to talk, essentially, it's a very loosely structured, informal conversation between two system safety engineers. So if you've got any questions or comments, of course, stick them in the comments section below. Of course, we won't be able to get to them now, but I'll do my best to address them after you've watched the video. And I'd like to introduce Dave Cummins. Would you like to introduce yourself, Dave?
Sure. So hi, I'm Dave Cummins. I'm a system safety engineer. I currently work for Bell Textron in the US here in Fort Worth, Texas. I used to work for Leonardo Helicopters as a system safety engineer and a safety manager on the 159 program over there for a number of years. And before that, I worked for Kinetic in the UK over at Boscombe Down for around 9 and a bit years there. So I've been a system safety engineer now for probably 10 or 11 years, if I had to add it up. Before that, I was into flight mechanics, performance, and test. I've always worked on military helicopter programs. A very brief stint on the graduate scheme with some fixed wing, but predominantly, I would say military helicopters. Do have a little disclaimer that I got to read out for me, just in terms of I've mentioned the companies that I work for, the company that I work for, and the companies that I've worked for in the past. Everything that I'm going to say today are my own views. They're nothing to do with those companies, as you would expect. Doing this off my own back. I've had some experience with STPA in particular, hence I know Simon. So I got involved with STPA quite a number of years ago. Through the stamp workshop actually that was running every year, and during the disease that cannot be named, all of those activities were conducted virtually. So I attended the virtual forum and I started asking quite a lot of questions in the background to the presenters, and was eventually pointed to the S18, which is the SAE's civil safety committee, where they write all the standards like ARP 4761 and so forth, that those in the aerospace world are used to. And they have a document in there called AIR 6913, which is all about how to use STPA in the civil construct. So I got involved that way, and started talking to Simon through that and through LinkedIn. So yeah, that's basically a little bit about me. I'm sure we can talk a bit more about that in a second.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dave, and welcome, of course. So the intention with this session, as I mentioned, is just to have a bit of an informal, unstructured conversation about a few topics that are dear to our hearts, and then ask each other some questions just to try and tease out our perspective on things and share some of the valuable experience we've got. Now, one of the topics, yes, the other intention is I'd like to do more of these videos in the future. There's quite a few people have approached me about talking about safety, about system safety engineering, particularly about STAMP, STPA, and CAST accident analysis. And I've been very quiet on social media for quite a while, doing various different things. And I think now is the time to start talking more broadly about things and helping other people on their journey to learning and getting experience, and then getting fantastic results with STAMP, STPA, and CAST. So today we'll start with a couple of topics. So first off, tell me a little bit about why, Dave, did you become a system safety engineer? When did you realise that you had that in you?
Um, So that for me, that transition, if you like, happened in the early 2010s. So as I mentioned before, I was working for Kinetic, right? And people who know Kinetic, they know that they do independent technical evaluation. It's that one of their mainstay products for the UK Ministry of Defence. And the idea with that is to interrogate the safety case that is presented by a design organization or a manufacturer, for OEM, for want of a better expression, and critically challenge it in a number of areas, looking at the evidence to see if the conclusions stack up from a safety point of view. So I got involved with that from my older disciplines of flight mechanics, performance test, as an SME effectively, and realized I was doing safety work because everything I was doing was, I guess unintentionally on my part at the time, to do with risk and hazards, and whether the argument stacked up. Um, and around about that time, an opportunity came forward for me to transfer into what was then the safety engineering outfit within that company. And took a promotion to do so. So yeah, it was quite by accident, really. But I suppose a lot of people would say that.
Yes, yeah. If you ask, do a survey of safety people, how did you get into safety? Quite often it's by accident.
Sure. I mean,
Right.
another really big thing that happened actually around that time, which was I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, but it is very good context to this, was about maybe 2 or 3 years earlier than that. The Nimrod review report had come out from Charles Haddon Cave QC, all about the tragic loss of Nimrod XV230 uh, earlier in the decade. So that had happened. There had been lots of organizations that I was working with or was part of at the time that had some kind of a role in that. And so it was very close to our hearts, learning that message of what safety actually meant.
Absolutely. I had personal experience, not directly related to the accident itself, or the Sir Charles Haddon Cave, now KC's independent review. But in 2009, I was working with the organization you mentioned as an independent contractor. And my task was to perform an independent technical evaluation of that aircraft, the Nimrod MR2 and Nimrod R1 designer safety case, so the likes of BAE Systems, but also the operational safety case as well. And I led a team of subject matter experts to essentially answer the question, should the aircraft, given that this has happened and the work that's going on with the independent review, should the aircraft remain in service? And so we spent a lot of time crawling all over the aeroplane, talking to lots of different people at various different places around the UK. And this was also the time that I started my journey back into academia. So doing a self-funded Masters of Science degree in Safety Critical Systems Engineering from the University of York in the UK. And as part of that sort of academic journey of doing a part-time master's degree, I spent a lot of time reading a lot of books, and that's when Professor Nancy Leveson at MIT provided a draft PDF copy of her second book, Engineering a Safer World, which introduces the concepts behind STAMP, STPA, and CAST. And what particularly drew me to STAMP at that time was the concept of a control loop. So seeing a controller influencing a control process through some form of actuators and sensors, and then the concept of the control structure model. And it really struck me that trying to do an independent technical evaluation of that aircraft, its safety case, and then in the context of the causes of the Nimrod disaster, it was very interesting to see that looking through the lens of a stamped control structure model, you could start to specifically explore challenges with organizations and how organizations organized, planned, and executed work, how they interacted with each other, even down to individual behaviors and what would explain why they would behave the way that they did, because most people don't come to work to cause an accident or, cause something bad to happen. So why would it make sense for them to behave the way they did in that context, that then unfortunately leads to something really, really significant? And so in 2009, sort of September time, that's when I really started to think, well, how could STAMP and the concept of STAMP, the models, control structure models, control loops, the concept of control actions, how could that actually help me as a safety engineer, as an independent technical evaluator in the work that I was doing at the time and since then? So that's when I really started to, get bitten by the STAMP bug, you could call it. But I was sort of quite close to the work that was going on. A lot of the people that were named in the report and in the newspapers, I know personally, or at least have been in the same room as them in meetings. And it really sort of opened my eyes as a safety engineer. We spend a lot of time focusing on the product or the services or the systems, but we don't necessarily spend that much time, or we didn't used to spend that much time thinking about the organizations that actually design, develop, test, produce, and operate these complex systems. So yeah, just about that. If you're watching this and you're interested, I am considering, well, I say considering, I've been considering for a while, but my
Mhm.
intention, I want to do a series of group sessions or videos where we actually go through the Haddon Cave report and talk about it in detail, work through and develop a control structure model or two together, and then answer any questions that people have. If that sounds like it would be of interest to you, please comment below. Or if you use LinkedIn, please find myself and Dave on LinkedIn, connect with us, and I'll be sure to let you know when we start to do that, if that's of interest. Okay, so what sort of things do you want to talk about with regards to that particular inquiry? Is it
So
with regards to safety management or technical safety of an aircraft or other topics?
I mean, it's such an interesting accident in general because it touches all facets, right, of the safety, the wider safety problem. It's not just about what technically went wrong. In fact, most of it is actually not about that at all. It's
No,
about
it's not.
the full safety assessment of it. So, I
Yeah.
mean, just on that subject, just a few questions for you. I mean, what does it mean to you? What did it mean to you at the time, and what does it mean to you now?
At the time, um, it was it was very challenging because just to share a little bit more context. So at that time in my life as a young safety engineer, sort of 29, 30 age, say relatively young, um, I've been working for BAE Systems at Wharton on the newer generation of Nimrod, the Nimrod MRA4 program, and made a decision in the summer of 2008 that I needed to organise a better paid job so I could pay my student university debts, pay to do the master's degree myself, and then pay for any other debts that I had at the time as a young person. And so, working on the Nimrod MRA4, my boss at the time, the chief airworthiness engineer, he was a good guy. We got along quite well. He coached and mentored me. And then when I jumped off into the contracting world as a contractor, and then working on the older generation, Nimrod MR2 and R1, we did actually get in some meetings during 2009 where he was sat across the table representing BAE Systems, and I was sat on this side of the table representing the independent technical evaluation. And so, personally, it was quite interesting as a young person, relatively, in that situation where I had to recognize that I'm there as a peer of these professional senior people with lots of experience. And I'm here, some might say to check their homework, but I think it goes much more deeper than it is about uh, observing the evidence that is presented and the behaviors of organizations and people and forming an opinion on all of that together, not just on what's written down on a piece of paper, but what's actually happened to get those words on the paper. And we spent, as I mentioned, we spent a lot of time going around the country to various different sites, collecting information, talking to people, looking at the physical aircraft and the state of those aircraft. And one of the things at that time as a young person, I was, it pains me to say now, a little bit egotistical. It was almost a case of, well, I'm here to do the safety investigation. I'm here to find out what's happened, what's gone wrong, what the failures were. And I didn't necessarily really appreciate that actually things were, in a lot of cases, a lot more subtle than that.
Mhm.
Because there were situations where failures had not occurred. There were a series of things that had occurred, which you wouldn't say are strictly failures. They're just the way normal things happen in those kind of organizations. And unfortunately, when those normal things coalesce, then bad things can start to happen. And it's, as an individual, you're almost working against a really strong current in certain organizations. And especially if you are, quite strident about things, I'm, talking on behalf of the victims' families of this particular situation. And I want you to tell me what's going on and let's get to the crux of this and let's sort it out. And at the time, I was not quite as humble as I'm a bit more humble now, shall we say. But I've not really understood the subtlety of being open to people, developing trust with people so that they'll talk to you and avoiding being judgmental. And for the lot of personal skills that you have to sort of develop over time, that at that point in time of my life, I wasn't self-aware enough to realize, I thought my way was the right way, and anyone else not lining up with that was not helpful. And actually, that's really not the right way to do things. There's a personal aspect of it, but also the severity, the gravity of the situation, because obviously it was the most significant loss of life since the Falklands in 1982. And of course, that meant a lot to the people involved. And when you're talking to them and getting their, real opinion on things, it's challenging to sort of manage that the emotional aspect of it. It takes quite a significant toll. And also the role that I was performing at the time, I was essentially performing some work that somebody else had to go off and be interviewed, under caution in London. And so being able to do a role that's really, important and really high value, but also seeing almost a parallel path of my career, somebody else going off and getting interviewed over something very serious. And could that happen to me in the future? Might it happen to me in the future where I have to justify decisions I've made, things I've done to somebody in the future in the context of something so serious? So it was, quite a challenging, humbling experience. And that really has shaped the way that I've developed myself over the years and how I, conduct myself now. And also the things that I say to other people and the advice that I give to other people, it's very much shaped by that. I mean, what else can I say? I could probably talk about it for many hours. It was a very humbling experience, very challenging, and um, I think being on the periphery of it and literally seeing what was going on, it's sort of helped me to see commonalities in elsewhere that I've been in my career. The same sort of behaviors, the same uh, management, shall we say, management styles, leadership styles, the
Yeah,
same things where people want to prioritize things or maybe ignore things, not for any nefarious reasons, but because they themselves are in a position where they have to make priority calls and they don't know any better.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, going to your question about how things have changed over the years, I think the outcome of that inquiry and the changes that it drove, and this is my personal opinion, being on the periphery of it, I think it's made things very, very much more complex, added a lot of complexity and detail, but I'm not sure it really addressed the major issues with organizations and the way that they work together to analyze safety issues and then mitigate safety issues and then ensure that that mitigation remains in place throughout the life of the system. And also collecting evidence or documenting evidence. How do they um, to that information and control it so that it is available when it needs to be revisited, for example. Um,
I felt like they definitely doubled down on a lot of the things that they were already doing, which wasn't necessarily like the best step forward. There were some great things that came out of it, though,
oh
in
yeah, of
my
course.
opinion, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
one of the really good things. I mean, I have a bit of an interesting perspective on this, I guess, just because I'm now working in the US and things are different over here, right?
Oh
Certainly
yeah.
in the military environment. But one of the things it did in the UK was it got rid of tribes within the three separate forces, the RAF,
Yeah.
the Navy, and the Army, right? So you no longer had to deal with like a separate structure within each organization that would have like um, different criteria and requirements of you to prove safety, if you like, right?
Mm.
That's even a good phrase. It's probably not the greatest phrase, but oh, you know, they established out of that report the military airworthiness authority in the UK, and now it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what outfit you're working with, which military organization you're working with, or what type of aircraft product. By and large, you are following the same regulatory requirements. So
Yes.
that allows you to put a lot of quality and effort into developing your safety management system to support that. So I actually think the MAA is a really great outcome of that.
Oh yeah,
I
absolutely.
wish
Yeah, yeah.
I wish they would do something like that over here, because over here you've got kind of what you had before. Um, the Haddon Cave Inquiry in the
Mm.
UK. There's each outfit of the military has their own regulator, their own authority and way of doing things, and it's slightly different when you go from one to the other all the time. So you lose that effect. So it's definitely been a good thing in my opinion. I mean, you touched on as well in there about the fact that people want to do good things, right?
Yes.
Um, and that they just don't realize when they're doing unsafe things. And for me, that was like one of the key takeaways. I was very young too when Haddon Cave came out. It was right at the beginning of my career, and I was thinking,
Mm.
wow, some really responsible, experienced people getting in a lot of trouble here, and some people have died, right? I mean, this is life and death. It's not
Mm.
just paperwork that we're taking away into an office, but by and large in my career since, right, I've seen a lot of people that have the best of intentions, the absolute best. I've never seen anybody without good intentions for safety, right? I can say that hand on heart. I truly believe that everybody wants a good outcome, right? But people don't necessarily always know how to get there, and other things influence them, which maybe subconscious, they may be part of organizational pressures.
Yes.
There's lots of different factors in there. Um, and whilst these are recognized, certainly I saw them recognized in the British environment, and they are here too in the US. I'm probably just a little bit less familiar at this point with exactly what they are over here. But in the UK, you've got things like the independent safety auditor, the independent safety evaluator that we were talking about before,
Yeah.
to try and pick up on these things. There aren't necessarily the best, in my opinion, the best systematic safety approaches that are holistic in nature to try and capture these things. And that was one of the reasons I liked STPA.
Yeah.
When I came across it, it was
Well,
much
it
more
evaporates
holistic.
those boundaries, those artificial boundaries.
Yeah. So not to say that STPA would have stopped the Nimrod review. It might have helped us in quite a few different areas. But
Yeah.
there's a heck of a lot to take away from that accident. Very hard to summarize, and it'd be great to talk about that in more detail with
Yeah,
some other
I'd love
people.
to talk about it in more detail. Decompose the report, talk about some of the themes, see how that relates to the specific hazards that are involved. Because one of the main challenges with learning and practicing STPAs that I've come across with various of my clients, and I'm sure you have as well, is the concept of hazard. How do we define hazard? If we're talking about a safety assessment, where do we start? Well, it's with
Yep.
losses and hazards or accidents and unwanted outcomes. But when we talk about the concept of a hazard, everyone has heard of the generic definition of a hazard, literally anything that has the potential to cause harm. But that label attaches to such a broad concept, a broad bucket of things that could possibly go in there, that it's almost unusable. One of the things I really like about STAMP and STPA is the concept of a hazard in that. And you'll see from a lot of my other videos and my training, I always put some square brackets around the word hazard to make sure that when people see that word with those brackets, they think, Simon's talking about the specific definition of a hazard used in the STAMP literature. And the benefit of that definition of a hazard I'm not going to go into the detail of it now because that's not the purpose of this, this conversation. But it's to help people realize that they have the opportunity to refine what they consider to be a hazard into something that's meaningful to them, that they can then apply some controls to it, control actions, and get some feedback about it, and really have a think about, well, what is the control structure that sits around that hazard to either prevent that hazard from ever occurring, or if it does occur, deal with the consequences. And if we need an emergency response, what must that emergency response look like? And when we're talking about the Nimrod XV230 accident, fundamentally it was an uncontrolled fire and explosion physical hazard. But when you actually start to look at, well, what are the other aspects involved in that? Because we've got the physical aircraft being operated, that is operated under a control structure, involving military and civil people working together. There's not just one aircraft, there's a fleet of them. They have to be maintained. The operational tempo, the location that this thing is operating in has some implications for that. But also when we look at the design control structure, these aircraft or whatever product, services or systems you're talking about, they have been designed by a control structure of some description. And it may be 30 years ago. It may be, as in the case of this aircraft, that it was almost 40 or 50 years ago when the initial design, the Comet was initially designed. And then over time, the design organizations, the people involved, whoever they were, they've designed it, modified it, make changes to it, how they conduct that change program, how they do the safety assessments, and then how do they keep that information current during the life of the fleet? And then how do they set, targets on the feedback? What feedback do we need from the operational context of this aircraft? And what information do decision makers need to be able to know when the thing is potentially stepping outside of those bounds of safety? And all of that control structure has to be designed or at least consciously created, because otherwise, the type of feedback and when we need it might be ignored, might be missed, might be misinterpreted. And so my focus is gone from just what is the product, service or system, but also what is the operations and design control structure around that product, service or system. So it's a very much broader perspective than traditional system safety engineering.
That's really good. I mean, there's so many similarities there to some other more recent accidents as well that have come out. I mean, would you say I mean, we touched on earlier the fact that I think it's a fact that the inquiry didn't vastly improve everything. It made some improvements in some areas. Other things stayed the same or actually got a little bit worse. But I mean, do you agree, I guess, that those things still exist in lots of other different industries and frameworks too today?
If there's lots of what, sorry.
Lots of the same factors exist within other
Oh
industries.
yes, yeah. The organizational and human behavioral aspects are everywhere. We're humans. It's we're the common factor in all of these accidents, and the way individuals work, the way organizations work, even down to how contracts and supply chains are managed. HR and project managers, I'd argue, are the two biggest causes of accidents, across everything. The way people are managed, the way they're resourced, the way that they're supported, the way that they develop themselves, because you can get a lot of people who have never had a failure. And so they want to, maintain that success record at all costs. And that type of behavior, that type of arrogance can really cause people to come unstuck and make bad decisions after bad decisions. And it's only when, a series of unlikely events conspires, the Swiss cheese lines up, that accidents occur. But they don't necessarily realize that the control structure and the behavior of these controllers is actually what has contributed to the accident. And, looking through the lens of Swiss cheese afterwards is only sort of describing certain causal scenarios that relate to each other and are obvious in hindsight. Whereas when you think about things through the lens of a control structure, you can see potential causal scenarios present in real time. And a silly example of that is the number of emails people get. You know, if you have an inbox absolutely rammed full of emails and you don't necessarily know what's in those emails, you know, there could be requests for lots of effort and time and energy, or they could just be niff naff and trivia that is distracting. But if you've got somebody doing some important safety related work and they are getting this constant flow of information and questions and requests, from an individual perspective, what effect does that have upon them? You know, if they haven't got enough time or energy or focus to look at all these things, how is that influencing them in the way that they do their work? Well, they're naturally going to start rushing. They're naturally going to start to do as much as possible and you know, get that list of emails, that stack of emails down to zero as best that they can. Otherwise, they'll start to feel overwhelmed. And when people are overwhelmed or stressed, they make bad decisions. They make short-term decisions that will benefit them in the short term. And essentially, over time, that means they'll make bad decisions the longer term, and they'll start accumulating technical debt, so to speak. And if that's one individual, imagine what that accumulation is across an entire team or across an entire project or business or even an industry. So it is very much a human factors, a human behavioral thing that we need to grasp and deal with. And, you know, I don't know about you, but my inbox, since, you know,
Uh-huh.
from 2009, comparing it today, it's many, many times, you know, more emails. And if you're,
Absolutely.
it's just ridiculous. And that's just communications and the way that we communicate with each other. And if you look at that through the lens of a control structure model, you as a person have all of these control actions and feedback all on top of you, essentially distracting you away from creative, important safety work. And at the
Yeah,
same time, it's eroding your energy, it's eroding your patience. You know, the more things you do, the more busy you are, the more decisions you make, the more prone you are to human errors, human cognitive errors and cognitive biases. So we shouldn't really be surprised that you know accidents are going to occur and that performance is less. It's just a nature of the world that we're in. But nobody really seems to be recognizing that or taking the lead and helping people to overcome that the challenge with overwhelm and
sure.
the negative aspects of it.
I think
Um,
moving on just from the Haddon Cave discussion, that there are a few things we said there that are worth exploring in a slightly different context. But you spoke about HR people, about
yes, HR and
managers,
project
but
managers,
business people
delivery
within it.
managers.
So so how would you describe, right, a safety person as opposed to a safety engineer, and why is that discipline? Oh, sorry, why is that distinction uh, necessary?
Good question. So I'll go back to my control structure model because I find it very easy to explain things. So if you imagine your product, service, or system, the thing that an organization creates or operates, when you're talking about a system safety engineer, traditionally they would be involved in the design organization, helping to design and influence the product, service, or system. If you're talking about a safety person as a more generic sort of label, I would argue that that person, that role is involved in the operations of a system, product, or service. And they will be mainly focused on operational type hazards, such as, you know, the typical health and safety hazards, such as, you know, slip, strips, and falls, or maybe getting crushed or exposed to hazardous materials. And that individual's mental model and control algorithm will be focused around that operational context. And so they are not equipped, broadly speaking, they're not equipped to understand or recognize the potential for causal scenarios that exist outside of that physical context. So if we're talking about, you know, a machine that, let's think about a machine that has the potential to crush somebody. They might recognize the potential for a crush hazard, but they won't necessarily recognize all the possible causal scenarios that could lead to that accident. And that is where the system safety engineers in the design organization, that's where they should be focused on. Now, another dimension to that, and that is who or what would be best placed to help design the operations organization or design the design organization, mixed in two words there. You know, who would be best placed to do an analysis of the contracts between a supplier and a customer to make sure that those contracts appropriately require, you know, a safety case or a safety management plan or a hazard log or something like that. How do we make sure that requirements and safety constraints flow across that interface properly? If we talk about HR, how do we make sure that the HR person in a design organization is not searching for somebody who is a safety person that deals with slip, trips, and falls? And I'm not sort of denigrating that work at all. What I'm saying is there are roles or people that are best equipped to do certain things. And somebody dealing with physical safety, physical hazards is probably not the right person, at least in the beginning, to deal with complex systems safety engineering analysis, though they both have the same word safety in their job roles. So how can we educate, you know, the human resources people so that they know who to look for when they're recruiting, and making sure that the people they do recruit have the right attitude and personality to deal with the demands of that particular safety role. Because quite often, especially as a safety contractor, you get parachuted in onto the deck of the Titanic. And one of the first things that you need to do is establish, is this my arrival here? Is this before we've hit the iceberg or after we've hit the iceberg? Because depending on which one of those scenarios it is, your behavior and the way you approach problems has to be different, especially if you have to deliver effectively bad news, or at least, you know, point out things that others don't want to point out. You know, everyone knows there's an elephant in the room, and you are there to essentially identify that elephant and help them to lead it out. That's always a challenge.
Have you got any questions for me on that subject at all? There's a lot we could talk
Have
about
you
there, I'm sure.
have you had any experiences with elephants in rooms and how to raise people's awareness of it?
Yes, I can't talk about the absolute specifics, but there have definitely been cases in all the organizations I've worked for where there have been things that have gone wrong or are going wrong, that are unpopular, should I say, with the management, or certainly the solution might be unpopular with the management.
Yeah.
And I mean, this really speaks to something we said earlier about safety. To me, is really, it's much more of a people discipline than it is a deep technical specialism like some of the other engineering outfits are, right? You have to be able to gauge why there's an elephant in the room, how best to address it, and uh, try and influence people to make the right decision, right? And
Yes.
that approach you have to tailor. You have to tailor it not only to the organization you're in, and that whatever structure they've got set up and the culture that they're operating in, but to particular individuals. And that is different everywhere you go. That's
Mm.
my experience of that, and it's certainly not true, I think, that you won't encounter that when you go to different places. Every
Oh yeah,
company has their
everywhere.
issues. It goes back to what we said before about, I think everybody means well. Um, there are just different pressures, and people don't know quite how to prioritize them the best. That's what your role is as a safety person, is to work out where you need to be from a safety point of view, and how best to get there with the people and the tools that you've got. So yeah, I've had
Yes.
experience of it. Can't go into the details, but those are sort of my overall thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's like I was saying, focusing on the product, service, or system. A system safety engineer has to do that and do the analysis and generate requirements for it and confirm requirements have been met. But aside to that, you've almost got another job, which is to help influence and manage and support the organizations
Yeah,
around that product or service or system. Because often you're potentially presenting an option which people really, really want to, you know, exploit, but you're showing them the showstoppers. And so
yeah,
you're effectively trying to stop the organization doing what it wants to do. And when I say effectively trying to stop, what I mean by that is people perceive that you're a showstopper, you are the problem, as opposed to the actual problem that you're trying to present.
Absolutely.
And so you have to develop skills, interpersonal skills, self-management skills, and that is an infinite game. You know, you do it for your entire life. You have to develop these skills and make mistakes and try again, try different approaches. But you have to enroll their support. And if you're not self-aware, you're not aware of other people's personalities and the way that they work, communication styles, you have to develop those skills. You have to actively do that. Because you won't be an effective safety engineer if you can't influence people or stay in a position of influence. And I'll give you an example. So I mentioned it, touched on it a little bit earlier on. There's been certain situations where I've been adamant that this is an unsafe thing to do. We shouldn't be doing it. We need to do something else. And I might not be able to say what that something else is because I need help from the other team members to establish this other solution and a better, more safe solution. But if you don't maintain, you know, your ego, your chin, so to speak, if you're, you know, strident, I'm right, you know, you're wrong, that's just never going to work. You're going to lose influence, you're going to lose trust. And if you want the system to be safe and everybody safe and well, you have to be able to control yourself and maintain that position of influence and trust. And you know, there are many different ways to do it. And I mean, we could talk about some books and you know other training and things like that, maybe in a different video. But if you're not able to, you know, control your own emotions and you know take a step back, then that's something that we all need to work on. Even when we're absolutely right, you know, this situation is bad, it's going to be dangerous, we can't do it. There are ways to make that position known and make sure that senior leaders are aware of that. But you don't have to go over the top. I'm not saying shout and scream. I didn't do that, or get into a you know a punch up. But we have to maintain that influence and communicate in a way that's appropriate, regardless of how hard that is. Of course, it's going to be hard. It gets easier as you get more experience, but it is one of the hardest things that safety engineers have to do. And I'd say that is you know, that's not something covered in the master's degree. You know, that's very much you know, human leadership aspects, you know, culture and philosophy. Mm.
I can give you one example of the kinds of things you're talking about from two different perspectives. So we mentioned right at the beginning, my first role was in safety, at least, was as an independent technical evaluator, right? I then actually went and went from being the poacher to the gamekeeper, and went back onto the other side within the design organization.
Oh,
And
yes, yes.
within both of those roles, actually, there was commonality in that before the MOD customer, I had to go with my teams to program safety committees, system safety working groups, right? And if you don't know what these are meetings that are held on a regular basis, usually at least once, if not more, a month, where you get the safety community that's involved on the program together with senior management on the program from all of the organizations involved. The independent technical evaluator turns up, the independent safety auditor turns up, and sometimes the operator turns up as well because they have a vested interest in these things. And we all have a big discussion about safety and lots of comments that have been raised on safety assessments and how best to resolve them, right? That's just the normal day-to-day job that people are used to, right? And I learned very quickly if I wanted to be effective in my ITE role, um, if I didn't think something was right, I had to craft that discussion and plant that seed of discussion carefully into those meetings. Um, Almost in a way to guide the outcome to where it needed to be, rather than it coming across as being standoffish. Hey, this guy is
Yes,
just going to block your safety assessment,
yes.
and he's recommending to the MOD that you reject the report. Right? That's a terrible place to be. You
Mm.
need to try
Adversarial.
and give a solution, right?
Mm.
And I saw examples of people doing that, going that way and being very negative, both on the ITE side and both within the design organization side. Um, and it resulted in the same thing, right? So, and it's just as bad on either side. And one of the things I observed on one of the programs I was on was that there was a perception. I would say it's probably a false perception because I'm sure they didn't mean it this way, but there was a perception that the other side was out to get us.
Yes.
Um, and therefore that we would not disclose necessarily everything that we might have disclosed in those forums. So it makes the safety working group and the safety committee less effective
Yes, it does.
when
Yeah,
those things
absolutely.
are happening. And it detracts from the safety goal. But as Simon said, I mean, it takes maturity to realize that and experience in the role to craft the discussion towards the outcomes that are needed from a safety point of view. And it's absolutely paramount to remember that it's not just paperwork. It's not
Yes.
just, let's just finish this meeting, get out of here and go for lunch. It's, somebody's life because that's what
Well,
it'll
even
come down
managing
to.
actions,
Yeah,
capturing actions properly, the discipline of running a safety working group meeting, making sure everyone is, clear what the intention is for the meeting, but also that it is open to discuss and raise safety issues,
yep,
even if it has to be raised externally, informally, and introduced. There's been a few occasions where I always start those kind of things with, look, if you've got a genuine concern, well, no, if you have a concern, whether or not you are certain that it is genuine, let us have the conversation either in private and I will address it and we'll table it and talk about it, or it's something that you can present and raising that safety culture, raising the psychological safety in those rooms, in those meetings is absolutely critical. Because if people don't feel like they can speak, or if they feel like that if they do speak, they're going to get shot down and not listened to or given the attention that they want, you're just undermining the safety program. And even if it's just a difference in understanding of a problem, there shouldn't be any sort of shouting and falling out and fighting. It could be a case of, look, this is how I understand the situation. I could be
yeah.
completely misunderstanding. Maybe I don't, my mental model is inadequate because I've not received direction or information feedback that I should have for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. Let's fill that gap in, get everyone on the same table. And if there still is a gap or an overlap, let's document it. Let's get some actions together, and then let's progress those actions. Don't just say it, not saying it in because you don't want to cause any problems. And as
And
you say, that comes with maturity and experience. But I'd go a step further. I would say that having a leader, well, everyone is a leader of themselves and others, but having a safety leader that is espousing that culture, that set of beliefs and behaviors
yep,
and objectives, I think is so important, especially for younger safety engineers. Because if you put yourself in a high pressure environment as a young person and you're not necessarily given them the coaching and mentoring that everybody needs, that can cause, longer term bad behaviors. And they may not realize that what they're doing are bad behaviors, but that's what they've come to learn from that particular culture. So I think it's important everyone has a coach and a mentor from a safety perspective, especially individual safety engineers. If people watching this, you don't have a safety coach or mentor, and you want some help finding one, send us a message, let us know, and see what we can do to organise and facilitate that. Don't whatever you do suffer in silence. If you have a genuine concern, or as I said, even if you're not sure it's genuine or not, you're just not sure. You think it might be, but it might not be. It's better to talk about it, just explore it, see what other information you need to confirm your suspicion, and then learn how to craft that message to the right stakeholders. I think that's where you were sort of touching on learning how
yeah.
to craft messages that don't upset or offend, or even if they do, how to deal with the consequences of that.
Definitely be less concerned, I would say, about looking silly for asking a question and getting educated. That's the worst case for you individually, perhaps, right? If you're embarrassed by that, right? But the best case is that actually you prevent an accident because you look a hell of a lot sillier stood in front of a court and a jury and some very upset family members
Silly is
after the
probably not
fact.
the word I would use.
Yeah, probably
Uh,
probably quite distraught, I should
bit of an
imagine.
understatement. Yeah.
Anyway, I had
Yes.
a slightly different topic, I guess.
Well, just yes, we go on.
I was going to ask current trends then in the safety world, and not just limited to aerospace, but what would you say they are from your experience right now in terms of system safety?
Safety trends, as opposed to more broadly about artificial intelligence or
Yeah,
accident
what's going
investigations
on
or
right now
complexity.
in the industry for you?
For me personally, so since let's have a think. So since I last did a video on YouTube, actually 2021, I've worked with quite a few different people and organizations across many different industries and across the globe. So I've had the opportunity to work in oil and gas, mining, autonomous vehicles, automotive software, uh, nuclear submarines, weapon systems. Um, is that everything? Yeah, a few railways, I think, a few healthcare, maternity safety, a few different things. Um, and what I found is overall, across all of those industries, they have the same challenges. They just talk about them using different words. Sometimes they use the same words to mean completely different things, and that's a bit of a challenge. You know, like I mentioned the word hazard, the label hazard. What does that mean? The label loss. What does that mean? And how do people interpret those words? Well, they all have the same challenges, and it is about control structures. I'm using the stamp because I just find it gives you the concept of stamp and the language of vocabulary that it gives you. It allows you to talk about anything to do with safety in any industry or domain. The challenge is when you're talking to somebody in a particular domain, listening very carefully to what they're saying and the language that they're using. So you can almost translate, well, this person is using the word hazard, but actually they're referring to causal scenarios in this particular part of the control structure. And the person I'm talking to is located in this part of the control structure. And becoming aware that their perception of the problem is from their particular part in the control structure. And me as an outsider, if you like, I'm coming at it and going, okay, well, this person is in a particular context. How can I model that context? How can I understand where they are? And then how can I use that knowledge of where they are in relation to the problem that they've got so that I could educate them and help them understand and get that different perspective? Um, I'm not sure that really answers your question. I suppose, yes, so in my context, there are more people looking at STAMP and particularly STPA and the concept of control structures than there has been ever before. You know, the last couple of years have been very, very busy, and it's really heartening to see that. But on the flip side, I also reflect back on 10 years, 2014 was the first time I visited MIT to attend the STAMP workshop, and it's now 2024, and I don't really see much has changed apart from there's another book and a few more papers and some more stamped workshops. There doesn't really seem to be much in the way of a global attempt to try and bring stamp to the masses. And that's, as I've discussed with you previously, that's one of the main reasons I've put together my stamp STPA foundation course, and will be releasing my cast version of that course in the coming months, because there isn't really any of that advice or support. And yes, there is a community of people, practitioners interested in stamp STPA and cast, but they're not really organized and congregated. And then there is the European Stamp Workshop and Conference this year, being hosted in Greece. I'll stick a link in the description actually, so that people can have a look at that. But that's one of the other few events where like-minded people can get together and share experience and share solutions, if you like. And I think it is, there is more and more people doing it, but it's just not enough, fast enough. We're still having significant accidents. The Boeing 737 MAX situation. I'm sort of pretty firm that had STPA been embedded in their approach, they might have identified those issues earlier and done something about it. I mean, that's another topic I could probably do a video series on, because there's so, like the Nimrod XV230, there are so many organizational aspects and interactions between different organizations that contributed to that unfortunate situation. It's not just a technical failure here. There was so much more to it. So I think the appetite for stamp is increasing. More and more people are looking at it, but there isn't really much in a way of helping those people up the learning curve and then supporting them. And that's what I want to help. That's what I want to help. And I also want to help other people, such as yourself, Dave, and others in the community. If they want to help in their industries, how can they possibly do it? Because it's all right knowing the subject matter of your particular specialism, but knowing how to do webinars and online courses and all that good stuff, I want to also share that knowledge and experience. I mean,
I've
from your
seen it.
perspective, what do you think?
Yeah, good question. I've seen a couple of trends. I mean, my experience limited to the military aircraft, particularly the rotorcraft sector of that. So it's quite specific, I guess. In terms of stamp and STPA, yes, lots of people are very interested in it, right?
Mm.
But every company I've seen that I've been involved with, I guess, that's tried to use it doesn't really know how to use it to achieve today's certification goals, right? So at
Yes.
the end of the day, um, they've got to prove that their design is acceptably safe, and that it meets, either a military certification requirement for risk as low as reasonably practicable, right? Or it meets, the FAR 25 transport category aircraft 1309
Yeah.
requirements in that you've designed out all of the failure conditions, right? So it's people are struggling to get back to that, um, and right now there's no specific guide or standard that actually helps you address that question. Um, I suppose the question should really be to the aerospace regime. Well, why don't you think about changing your airworthiness approach to some of these things to incorporate a wider scope of things? And that is one possible way of doing it. I think, to be fair, in the military environment, they're probably they're closer to that, just because you look at Mill Standard 882 or you look at Def Stam 56, they're very broad in the types of hazards that we can identify and assess. The civil world, it's not that they're not looking at it, but they're sort of more focused on the failure condition side of things. What I would say is that through the S18 committee, that's been recognised in the civil world that they need to do something about that. The FAA and the EASA are very interested in how methods like STAMP can be used to address the current certification requirements. And we have been asked actually to produce a Air Information Report, or AIR, to kind of see that as a guide to how to apply a new technique or a new emerging technology to an existing standard. So we're looking at how we can utilize STPA specifically alongside the aerospace recommended practice, dropping a few standards here, 4761, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Hey,
so how it, yeah, A. So how we
that's
can
a
use
safety
those things.
engineering joke. If you're not a safety engineer, you might not get that, definitely.
True. So that actually will come out, I hope, in the next 12 to 18 months. It's going through ballot at the moment on the
Exciting.
committee, and the idea is that it shows you how you can use STPA to supplement the ARP
Mm.
approach. There are some other discussions going on S18 about, okay, let's try and get outside of the remit of just looking at failure conditions. Let's have a
Yes.
wider scope. So there's been some talk about safety of the intended function, or SOTIF, as it's known from the
Yes.
automotive world.
Yeah.
And maybe that might bring an angle in for STAMP, particularly within the human factors realm on the system,
Yes.
the civil safety aspects. They now have their own subcommittee on S18, and they are starting to look wider as well, through the
Oh,
lens of
awesome.
safety, but into some of these things. So I've seen that for STAMP. One of the other big trends I've seen, I saw it in the UK, probably started to happen around, I would say, 2017, 2018. I might have the years a little bit mixed up, but um, there's a real effort in the military world now to try and incorporate civil practices and civil safety standards um, within the military framework.
Yeah.
I Over there, it started with Destan 970, incorporated a lot was of what was in FAR 25, FAR 29, whether you're dealing with a big transport aircraft or a big transport helicopter
Mm.
into the airworthiness environment, and they give you effectively a accepted means of compliance for using the civil approach. So we've seen a lot of that. The Americans over here, they're at it now as well with that. There's a lot of different interpretations of how to do it, some good, some bad, some indifferent. So yeah, those are the two big trends that I've seen, and I think
Mm.
the stamp in particular will pick up once there is more established guidance and people, that's only going to happen through companies and people are experimenting with stuff and reaching
Yeah.
out to people like you and to MIT
Mm.
and other organizations that are around to actually try playing with these things.
It is. I totally agree with that. Some of the challenges to going down that path and implementing stamp in those environments is, I mentioned this and you touched on it earlier on, the definition of a loss or an accident or an unwanted outcome, and then the definition of a hazard. And in the case of, you mentioned there, ARP 4761A and the CS25 civil certification for large aircraft, they talk about the concept of failure conditions, and failure conditions pop out of what's called a functional hazard assessment. And so there's a bit of an alignment that has to happen between the traditional definition of a hazard in military and civil, depending on which type of system you're talking about and what domain, whether it's air or land or whatever, and then the definition of a hazard in stamp, and then the definition of failure conditions. Because there's a hint in the term failure condition that is just, it's a narrower perspective than stamp. So stamp looks at failures and what I call dangerous successes. So this is where situations have behaved as designed and they've resulted in an accident. Whereas failure conditions is very much about the failure side of that coin. And so if you're only worrying about failure conditions, what are the dangerous success conditions that we're not missing, that we're not looking at?
Yep.
So there's quite a lot of conceptual translation, probably not the right word, uh, consideration that needs to happen before people can really start to make some fast progress. And of course, the other challenge, and we touched on it earlier on, if you have a safety engineer that's focused on physical hazards and has no experience with functional hazards or functional hazard assessments, like in civil air transport, then they've got a set of steps to climb before they're aware and capable of thinking in terms of functional hazards and failure conditions. And then there's another set of steps you have to climb to really embrace the stamp define hazards, and then the concepts of control structures and control loops. And if you're talking to if somebody in the audience is involved already in the design and development of complex systems, especially those that are in a regulated environment, your ability to learn and take advantage of stamp in that context will be a lot more straightforward than if you work in the physical safety area of an operational safety situation. You're going to have what's the meme? Yeah, so it's the ladder, the rings between a ladder. For somebody in design and development of complex systems, the rings will be much more closer together. So it'll be less of an arduous climb, so to speak. Whereas if you're in the operational domain and you work in a less regulated industry where it's almost open for you to do it however you want to do it, the rungs on that ladder are much more spread apart and it's going to be a more difficult, arduous journey. But again, that's why going to the MIT workshops, watching the presentations and the training course I mentioned earlier on will help to shorten those runs so that you can shorten the spacing so that you can learn faster and start to get results faster.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, you've got
mm,
to experiment with it, and you're going to get some
yes,
great ideas and great perspective
yes,
from seeing what other people are doing with it.
yes. And if, as I say, if you want any help, you want to ask some questions, then I want to start a forum where people can do that, or just stick a message below this video and we'll talk about it. Moving on to so we talked about quite a lot of things there.
We have, yeah, we've
We've
talked about a heck of a lot
talked
of
a
things.
lot. I mean, should we just check the time actually? So yeah, we've been going quite a long time. Were there any other topics that you wanted to talk about or
Let
specifically
me have a quick. I
expand on?
have got some notes in the background here, so I am cheating a little bit.
Me
Um,
too.
maybe one last one, right?
Oh, go on
And
then.
this
Bonus
is a
one.
for me this is like I see this one a lot, right? It's one of those harmful influences that comes into the safety world, but it doesn't need to be harmful, right? Safety and profit, right? So every organization out there, we live in a capitalist society here in the West, right? Everybody wants to make money out of what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Safety is intangible until it's not. You know, if you do safety right, you spend a heck of a lot of money on it and nothing happens. That's
Yes.
the result you want.
Mm.
So how do you think safety and profit are related? Um, you know, and what are some misconceptions about it for you?
Mm. There's a lot we could unpack there. For me, yeah, for me, you can make a lot of profit by being very, very unsafe and very dangerous. And you might get away with it, you know, flipping the die, rolling the die every day. You get away with it, you get away with it. People start to think, oh, well, we've got away with it this time. Nothing bad's going to happen. It won't happen to us. And then one day, something really serious happens, and all that profit is basically, well, it's wiped out. You're going to have to start borrowing money to pay out, you know, the insurance or the victims of the incident. And if an organization was really serious about safety and making a profit, they would invest in trying things, you know, making mistakes, learning from their mistakes, managing their tolerance of risk. So are they really sure they just want to, you know, crack on with maximum profit and not invest in safety? Or if safety issues are raised, ignoring them until they become a problem? And really all of that is it really is, as Jocko Willink, the US Navy SEAL officer, talks about in his books, Extreme Ownership. It is literally all problems are leadership problems. And if you have leadership that are profit above all else, and they're not wise to how safety engineering works, they might not appreciate that there is a benefit to doing safety engineering, and managing that risk and
Yeah,
engineering your organizations to be resilient and still profitable. Um, you know, it literally is down to leadership and their culture and behaviors.
I
Um,
see it. I see it as if you misunderstand that relationship, the influence of profit and the goals of profit can be harmful to the safety outcome, right? If you understand that relationship, you start to see that actually the two are very closely related. And if you design a safe product, people are happy with your product. They want to buy more of them. In general, it's probably also highly reliable. You know, it doesn't require a lot of modifications and work to it. It has greater capability because we don't have to restrict it in lots of different ways because of safety reasons. So your product that you've spent a lot of money developing anyway is actually more saleable as a result.
is
So if
better
you
for the market.
understand those two things, I think, you know, you can make the profit you need and achieve the safety goals that you need. You just have to think about them carefully.
There is another aspect to that, and I'll bring HR and project managers back into the conversation. So if you have a lot of safety people that are disquieted by the way things have been run or mistakes, you know, management decisions, or you're having difficulty recruiting and retaining people, that is a sign there's something wrong with your safety management, your safety culture, and it's almost a matter of time before something happens that's bad that wipes out your profit. And for me, profit and safety are just goals. And what matters is the process, the system, the control structure that
Yep.
leadership put in place to achieve those goals. And if they spend a lot of time thinking about the profit goal and how to achieve that, and then without then thinking about what is the control structure for assuring safety, then it's always going to be lopsided. And eventually something bad's going to happen that either wipes out the profit, ends the business, or puts people potentially in prison. And all the time that that's going on, you're going to have safety engineers that are probably going to be very stressed, making challenging decisions at work, maybe resigning, maybe going off sick,
Yep.
not being able to recruit people. And not being able to recruit people might be because the perception of that organization from outside is, well, they're running fast and loose with profit without necessarily recognizing or doing something important, doing something about safety. And that perception, safety engineers talk to each other, whenever whenever you see a news article, you kind of think, I wonder what the safety engineers were doing in that situation and why they allowed, the leadership to make those kind of decisions. And I might be thinking about autonomous vehicles there, and the trials that are taking place in certain places, and the certain accidents that have made the news, and you just think, well, how have they allowed that to get out of the organization? How have they not recalled it and done some modifications to it? Um,
I think maybe we finish on this perhaps, but the thing, and maybe you agree or disagree, but the thing that keeps me awake at night from a safety point of view is not the thought of, well, we're going to have an accident and I might have to stand up in court and defend myself. Sure, that frightens me, right? I don't want to do that as much as the next person doesn't want to do that. But the real thing that scares me is having to see what the reaction is from the families and the loss of human life that comes out of that. So whenever you're doing your safety activities, whatever they happen to be, in whatever forum you're working on, remember that somebody's life is at stake with what you're doing. This is a life and death game. And as we've said, if you're not sure about something, ask the question, reach out, talk to the wider community. Be careful of the detail you get into
yeah,
if you
yeah,
have to
not
for
share
various
details. Yeah,
reasons and all those caveats. But, you know, feel out what the best way to go is and don't just do something because of the pressure.
yeah. I think there was 2 points I was going to make there. I think just recognizing being a safety engineer is a very, very responsible thing to do. But it's also very potentially stressful, especially if you feel that you're not getting the support from leadership, or people are not listening to you, or people are putting ridiculous deadlines on you that don't give you enough time to really sit and think creatively about what you're doing. That is very challenging. And of course, if whoever it is watching this wants to talk about that, or at least join a community of like-minded people to get that support, then yeah, of course, that's a good idea. The other side that I was going to put to this is is that if you imagine the control structure and you're a safety engineer doing the safety work, and you've got systems engineers and product managers and other people in the organization, you're so close to the safety sharp end. You're like this with it all the time. And so you understand that if you don't do things right, or things are not done, then accidents can occur and there's very real consequences. But when you're a systems engineer or a project manager or elsewhere in the organization, you're more remote from it. And because your job is not safety, you're not going to be reading accident reports and watching news reports about things that have happened, or talking every day about safety. So it's almost a bit more remote. You're a bit more, you're in your own protective bubble, if you like. But also, especially for senior leaders making big decisions, you can be overwhelmed by the sheer scale of some of these safety problems and these hazards. And when people start, especially safety engineers, talk about these hazards as real things having actually occurred and what mitigations do they want, safety engineers in a lot of cases are almost, I won't say immune to the potential trauma of these things actually happening, because you can never prepare yourself for that. But you almost have a bit of a thick skin against if you're thinking about bad things all day, every day, that can start to affect you. Whereas if you're talking to senior leadership that don't have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis, they can get really uncomfortable and quite upset or quite defensive when you start talking about those things. And when we start talking about probabilities of certain things happening, they almost as a defense mechanism, have to try and, you know, convince themselves that it's so unlikely to happen that they don't need to worry about it. And it's almost to protect themselves that they have to think like that. And I think as safety engineers, we have to respect that those other non-safety engineer people might be trying to protect themselves. And if we're constantly trying to bring stuff up and get attention to it, that can actually drive a wedge between leadership and the safety engineers, even if you don't intend it. Well, of course, you're not going to intend it, but they themselves will be trying to protect themselves. So have a think about the approach that you can actually keep them on side with you and keep that trust so that you can have real good conversations about safety and help them to make good, wise, moral decisions. So yeah, were there any other things you'd like to talk about? Because we've sort of touched on civil and military and how to blend safety. We talked a bit about STPA emergence. Just to quickly on that, I think Stamp, STPA, and CAST are great. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a evangelist or anything like that, but in my experience, and especially working with various clients, where I've been able to get them some really fantastic results very quickly without too much,
Yeah,
hard work. I'm more than sort of convinced that that's going to help people. The challenge is then how do you integrate that into an organization that's been doing safety in a particular way forever?
yeah.
Yeah, and that is a different problem. That is a bigger challenge, but that's certainly something that needs to be that is emergent and needs to be dealt with. We talked about leadership and personal behaviors and discipline. We sort of touched around that quite a lot in different areas. Um, just personally, from my perspective, I mentioned at the beginning I've not done many videos the last couple of years for various reasons. One of the things I've done in the last sort of 12, 18 months is I've worked with a personal coach, both a physical fitness coach and also a mindset leadership coach. If you haven't got a coach in that area, the areas you need development, I highly recommend it because trying to learn stuff yourself through a book, reading books, watching videos, you only get sort of an idea about the periphery. But if you actually work with a coach, somebody who can actually give you feedback about you and your behaviors and your beliefs and help you overcome those personal challenges, you can make vast strides in, improvements than you could just trying to play at the problem. And if you're really serious about safety, and you really want to move forwards, absolutely get a coach, get some formal support. Do you have any questions about that, Dave? Have you had any
Um,
coaches or done any coaching
I
yourself?
have had some coaches and I've done a little bit of it myself in the past. So
Yes.
I'm a chartered engineer in the UK.
Yeah.
So from a very early point in my career, I had mentoring from another chartered engineer who helped me attain the standard and guided me. A lot of conversations, some of them quite technical, but a lot of them actually just like the discussions we've had today, right?
Yeah.
What's the right thing to do? How do you go about approaching this individual or solving
Mm.
this particular people problem, right? I had a lot of coaching that way. When I joined safety, I had a great safety mentor. He might be watching this.
Hello,
um,
safety mentor.
he was fantastic despite being a Yorkshireman as a
Oh,
Lancastrian,
I'm a
you know.
Yorkshireman.
I
Let's
know
start
you
with
are, yeah.
that.
So, he was fantastic and really helped me to explore what was going on in safety. And then later on, I think it's a duty of all safety people or engineers in general, right, or just
Yeah,
professionals
leaders.
to pass
Yeah,
on knowledge and to work with people. So I've mentored other people that are trying to achieve the chartered engineer status. I'm
that's
not
brilliant.
currently doing that right now, but I'm open to doing it if people want to get involved.
Well, that's the opportunity to stick your LinkedIn uh, address in the comments so people can stalk you and send you a message and say, "Hi, Dave. I would love to have you as my coach and mentor."
Yep, yep. But there you go. Yeah, open
That's
to that.
awesome.
It's all good stuff.
Awesome. Were there any other things you wanted to talk about or questions before I go into the summary?
I think we've covered a heck of a lot. I'm sure we
Yes.
could do another one of these sometime, and there's
Yeah.
probably other people that would want to join in and add lots of questions to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, those of you that are watching, hello. Um, I'm sure the next one of these will be much more better organized and structured. So for that, I must apologize. But as the saying goes, you have to, give these things a try. and get better. You can only learn through feedback. So please, stick some comments in the chat, in the comments section. Ask questions, make comments, suggestions for improvements, suggestions for topics, or even future guests. So getting people on and have maybe a panel session to discuss hot topics, and suggest those topics. And of course, the obligatory, YouTube video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, because it really helps the algorithm. All the best YouTubers say that. But more interestingly, just as a safety engineer, human factors perspective, you'll notice in a lot of videos they always say, "Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe." But if you have a think about the cognitive psychology of it, a bit of sales marketing, a bit of human factors. If you say remember to like, share, and subscribe, then people should. So please, leave an opinion whether that works or not. And of course, as I said, if you want to be involved in one of these sessions in the future, or you want to be involved in training and coaching, you're welcome to leave a comment or send us a message on my website. If you need some actual training, coaching, mentoring, and support, maybe some independent review of your work, your safety work, your stamp work, you want to get a warm feeling that you're going in the right direction, please reach out on the website. You can stick a message on there. And of course, if we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please, send a connection request and let's build a community over there. So I just want to say thanks, Dave, for coming along. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. I'm sure the community get a lot out of it. And I'm really, really excited for what the future holds. I'm really quite excited about that. So thank you
Yeah,
very much.
yeah. Thanks for having me, Simon. It's been a great discussion. We've talked about a lot, and I think we've had some
Yes.
good chats.
Well, I'll be sure to make it a bit more structured next time.
You're all good. And
Awesome.
thanks everybody for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.
Cheers.